Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast.
Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast, a public works podcast of the nerds, for the nerds, and by the nerds. I'm your host, Mark Culver. Today, we're going to dive into a familiar topic and one that should be on the mind of every public works department professional at some time, pretty much every day: asset management. Early on in this podcast journey, I would ask my guests what piece of technology or software has transformed their workplace, and almost every guest mentioned GIS or asset management, and usually both in the same breath. With our guest today, Jon Kremer from OpenGov, we're going to talk more about the current state of asset management and the future of asset management. So welcome, Jon. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, me too. Glad to have you here. Why don't you just take a few minutes and, as I've started to say now, give us your origin story. Introduce yourself and, let us know where you came from.
Yeah. So, like I said, glad to be here. I'm born and raised in the Midwest, live in Dubuque, Iowa. So, like a lot of I know Mark, just like you up north, have family up there too, but Hawkeye fan here. So maybe we got a little rivalry there.
We do.
But,
Go Gophers on this side.
But just, kind of growing up, I've always had a passion for technology. So that was I was a Geek Squad agent for a while. So kind of become a public works nerd, I guess, from geek to nerd. But yeah, I had a opportunity, went to school here in Iowa, University of Northern Iowa. Then after college, had an opportunity to join Cartegraph, which is a company that was based in Dubuque, Iowa. And I've had the fortunate, luxury to be working for Cartegraph and now OpenGov for 15 years. So yeah, it was when I first started at Cartegraph, I had the opportunity to be an implementation consultant. So that's where I got my start. So that was working with local governments across the United States. I got to travel a lot, which was cool from a young person. I had the opportunity to do that, but more importantly, I got to really meet all the great work that's being done across our country and understand our customers, obviously learn about the product and the technology, but just most importantly, understand the asset management space. So I was able to take a couple years of working on that. I got married. Travel wasn't as maybe as attractive as, priorities change. Yep. So, but I had the opportunity to take all that experience and move into the product management space. And that's where I would say I truly found my calling. I've loved every minute of it since then. So taking still working with technology, but also, working with our engineers and our UX team to actually build the next iterations of features and capabilities that can make an impact, right? So love doing that. I've been out with OpenGov. I lead up the product management group for the Enterprise Asset Management Suite, formerly known as Cartegraph.
Awesome. Yeah, and what a cool role to move into, and we'll get into more about what that actually means here in a minute. Before we started this podcast, Jon and I admitted that we'd probably end up on some tangents. So first tangent we're going to take is, you said you did a lot of travel. What was your favorite place? Like, thinking back to it, what was like one of your favorite places that you traveled to?
Yeah, so I spent a ton of time down in Texas. We have a longtime customer, Bear County, Texas. They're a county that surrounds the San Antonio area. And
oh, cool.
Yeah, I had an opportunity. At the time, they were one of our largest customers, still a great customer of ours. But we have a program where we would actually come down every month and do implementation. So I was basically I would say almost a secondary residency down in Texas. So yeah. I got to really enjoy Riverwalk in that area. So I really enjoyed, San Antonio area. Spent a lot of time in Florida. Usually Florida trips in the winter were the nice trips.
Yeah, right? You're smart enough to maybe coordinate that, but yeah.
Yeah, so if I could do that, Florida, Arizona in the wintertime, California any time of the year was usually pretty good. So, try to, where we could, was able to take advantage of some of those, get away from the cold weather here in the Midwest.
Yeah. Just another tangent on my side. My first real job out of college, I was working for a video detection company based out of St. Paul, Minnesota, the Autoscope. And I got so lucky to get this job, and I literally traveled around the world training distributors on how to use the product and going to some trade shows and things like that. Just had a blast. But like you said, I got married. My wife was in school at the time. Once she got out, and we're buying a house, and that it got to the point where I don't want to be traveling anymore. I'm in Italy trying to buy a house, and that sounds cool, but not so cool when you're actually, trying to get something done back home. But yeah, some travel is both a blessing and a curse. I mean, it's an amazing thing, but it can be real draining too. So,
Sure.
well, awesome. Well, we kind of have a little bit of a script here, and I'm already going to go off script a little bit, but talk a little bit more about this product management role that you're in. I mean, because it just sounds so cool to me. And how does that work, and how do you influence like new features and things like that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's not something you go to school for. I mean, they've
Right.
actually started to put some programs together at some universities, but for the most part, it's not something that you go to school like I'm going to be a product manager. A lot of times we're transplants either from a lot of engineers, a lot of business majors, which is where I kind of came from, kind of move into it. But yeah, I mean, we're some people will call it kind of the CEO of the product, right? So
Mhm.
ultimately, we're responsible
That's a
for
cool
the
title. Yeah.
yeah, it's not a bad title, right? Overall success of the product. So, kind of soup to nuts, right? We have to make sure that, we go from, a problem. Really what I do, if you boil it down to, is we solve problems, right?
Yeah.
So those problems happen to be problems about, trying to solve a new regulation. How do we make sure we have a product or a solution to do that? And that's a problem, right? So then working with really smart people, a lot of smarter people than I am most of the time, right? Engineers, we've got a lot of great UX designers. We kind of come together to, see how we can solve it. But that's where the fun part is. And then it's now that we kind of know the problem, let's actually build it. And then how do we actually get it out to the market, make sure it actually meets the needs, that we actually land
Yeah.
it or not. And, a big thing I always say is my job ultimately boils down to, are we building the right things at the right time? If our customers are finding value on these things, if they're buying it, if they're solving their problems, that's great. But if we do it 2 years too late, that's not good either, right? So
Right.
when's the right time we can do it? So, but I think being a natural, just being curious is a big skill set, and just solving problems is, I think, the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a great role, and I love that title, pseudo title there, the CEO of the product. Um, well, let's jump into asset management. Um, I've been throughout my career, I've been, I guess, lucky enough, I'm using air quotes for those that aren't watching the video, to actually implement an asset management system 3 times now. I'm on the third try here. Maybe one of these times I'll get it right, here in Brooklyn Park. But many, many moons ago, I implemented Cartegraph at Maple Grove, and that was probably back in like 2010, 2011. And then when I went to Roseville, they were using a more simpler system, and we ended up implementing a different product, a more UI based product, graphical user interface, and more tied into GIS, not Cartograph. Um, and then now that I'm in Brooklyn Park, we are implementing Cartograph here, and it's kind of just interesting to see, it happening at 3 different agencies. And it is what's really interesting about it is it's so dependent on the people, in the agencies, how it goes. And they ultimately, there have been, and I have no doubt that the one in Brooklyn Park, we're in the implementation phase right now, will be successful. But ultimately they are successful. But it's just interesting how the different people, the different personalities, and that gravitate towards it, and how the experience is just different based on that. But getting to that, I guess I wanted to ask you, and one thing that I've noticed is that even though I've done this 3 different times over the last 15 plus years, and the systems have changed dramatically. I mean, they're on the cloud now, and have a lot more features in that, but they're also very similar to what I initially implemented in Maple Grove as far as, just data, in fields, a database look. So, I guess, maybe talk a little bit about what you've seen in changes for asset management over time, and how that's improved the system.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I touched on something you said I thought was really interesting about the people. And one thing that
Yeah.
we say, like there is a lot of products out there, totally, right? There's a lot of great products out there that can solve this problem, which is good. Competition's a good thing, right? But we always say it's not just the products, it's the people and the process as well. It's kind of this like three-legged stool, right? You have to have the right people and the right processes. If you just have a product and you don't have the right people or processes to actually make it successful, then the product's probably not going, even if it's the best product in the world, it's probably not actually going to be that successful for you. So that's, a big part of our professional services team, and the partnership approach of we're not just, we're selling software to people, right? It's just a personal business, right? We're not just taking it off a shelf, right? And we're just here, install it and you're done, right? This when we work with local governments, right? It is more than that, right? It is something that we have to be really really plugged in with. So I think that's just an interesting thing you brought up, because I agree with that 100%. As far as change, I would say I think with technology, right, the only constant is change. I think that's
Right.
kind of the joke, right? That's kind of what the only constant's change. But I look back, when I first started at Cartegraph, we were still using a product called Navigator. If you've been a customer for a while that had used it, it was a very client server based. It was access database behind, very older school, which again, you're right. The data we're collecting hasn't necessarily changed. If you're collecting a sign, it still has an MUTCD code. It still has a direct, like those data elements haven't changed. It's just more, how are we interfacing and accessing that data, I think is the key there. Because when we had the old school Navigator product, that was really built for a paper-based workflow. It was kind of, you think about like, there was some people in the office had access to it on, one or two computers, right? And a lot of times we would print out paperwork orders or tasks to have people go out and fill out their time. But it was really designed.
That's how we did it in Maple Grove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was just how it was designed to work. And I think over the years, the way that technology has provided opportunities to make that process a lot more streamlined, right? We're actually bringing in mobile devices, having 15 years ago, people would laugh at you if there was a tablet, right? Even when the iPads first came out, we always joked, we kind of put our stake down pretty early on in the Cartegraph side, which I think was a great idea. Like, this is actually going to be the way people work. And at the time, some people laughed at us, right? They said, well, these are toys. People are just going to, break them or lose them, or they're just going to play games or watch YouTube on them. But now, you look at it and people can't live without them, right? It's even got to the point where we're actually seeing a trend where I would say the phone has taken over, right? People would say like, oh, phone's too small. But now we're hearing feedback, just it's easier to have the phone in my pocket. I know I always have it. I'm used to using that screen size. So even the concept of even having a tablet has kind of moved into more, how can we make sure everything works on a phone and support that? So I think
it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a similar path as like social media, where like, Facebook and that was all computer based, and the interface was designed, with probably bigger windows and more text and this, that, and the other. And now everybody wants to interface with that through their phone. They want to interface with their parking tickets or bill payment and bank accounts and everything through their phone instead of the computer. And asset management has followed that same trend of, make it as simple as you can. As a product manager, how has that been challenging for you to, because it is a different real estate, it's a different screen size, and there's only so much you can display at a time. So how has that been challenging for you, and what have you done to maybe overcome that as far as delivering that information on that smaller screen?
Yeah, it's totally a challenge. And you're right. Yeah, you can't put the same tools in front of someone that you would put on a desktop and expect it to work exactly the same way on a phone. I think everyone's probably used I would say, an unoptimized experience.
Hmm.
Either a website or an app where it just feels like it was just kind of copy pasted onto a mobile device, and the buttons don't work or they're not touch friendly. So you got to think about these things that, hey, if I'm on a phone, and this is where I'll actually give total kudos to our fantastic user experience and design team. This is where they've done a lot of research, right? Hey, if I'm on a smaller screen real estate, the button sizes have to change. We have to think about maybe not showing too many things, because part of it is sometimes it can get too busy, right? Like if there's too
Yep.
many things on the screen, this is where we've had a lot of thought around personalizing the experience depending on the persona. So if it's someone that's just out in the field that just needs to get their work done, maybe they're filling potholes, replacing signs, they don't need a lot of the advanced tools that maybe a supervisor needs or more of an asset manager needs in the field. So what we don't want to do is overload their experience and put too many buttons and options and actions to users that just don't need it, right? So if we keep the experience simple, while still we have the feedback that, hey, I'm an asset manager, I'm in the field too, I want to have access to do these advanced tools while still kind of balancing the need to provide those tools. Because again, we have a lot of customers that they don't go to the office anymore. They don't even have a
Right.
computer, right? They're out in the field, 95% plus of their day, and they want to be able to do their work with their mobile device, right? So it's a constant battle. I would say we're not perfect. We're always iterating towards that, but making sure that we're thinking about who's actually using it is really important as part of that
Yeah.
process.
Do you get much pushback from users? I mean, I know you guys have a pretty good user group, even regionally, in different areas of the country. But do you get pushback from users about like I really want to do more, and you kind of got to tell them, well, no, it's just not going to work well on a phone.
We get it both ways. Yeah, I mean, I would
Yeah.
say we get the feedback that they want to, we definitely get the feedback they want to do more, and we get that we've like, hey, I want to be able to do these features and these features. And so, but vice versa, like recently we've been adding a lot of new capabilities. It's been a focus so that it can be supported on the device. But then we kind of also got the pendulum swung all the way over to the other side, I guess, where we're like, oh, wait, now there's too much. So we actually ended up implementing capabilities where you could hide certain things or turn off certain things so you could kind of greater control as an admin. These people get these features and these people don't. So I would say we've gotten it both ways, but there's certain things, right, that probably will never be on a mobile device. I would say never. That's always a hard thing to say, but
Right. Right.
there's like if I'm building new structure or I'm maybe building a really complex report, it's probably not the right tool to do that on the phone. It's
Yep.
probably something that would be better when you have a large screen at an office, um, but yeah, you never know, right? Saying never is, if
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
tools
Right.
become, yeah,
You're doing things now you thought you'd never do 10 years ago. So yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. I don't know, let's try to pull us back on track here, but um maybe talk a little bit more about some your implementations. I know you've you've done a lot of implementations. You're not in that realm now right now, but you've been to Texas, you've been to Florida, been to California. Um Talk about some of those implementations and even the different sizes of those implementations.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you mentioned obviously, working at Maple Grove and being part,
Mhm.
Mark, of that. And I think our paths must have just like crossed or not like just missed each other, it sounds like, because I think we were talking beforehand that I had one of my earlier implementations was working with the city of Maple Grove. And I think it was either after, or, yeah, we just missed each other, it sounds
Right,
like
right.
when that goes.
Probably
But
when Maple Grove was moving to the OMS system or whatever you guys
right. I think
call it. But
they
yeah.
were
Yep.
on the old
Yep.
Navigator and then they moved to, yeah, the more web-based OMS
Yep.
product for sure. Yep. Yep. So I worked with a lot of customers, big and small. Uh, I will say, I guess I'll give a personal story. Like one of my first times I did an implementation, I did an implementation. This was like literally my first implementation. It was a small town in Georgia, maybe less than 30,000 population. And I think, when you come into a new job, right, you have imposter syndrome, right? Like, how am I going to
Yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
how am I going to like make these guys successful? Like,
Yep.
I'm coming out of college. I'm pretty new, I probably know just a little bit more than they do on the product, and so, but I think, what we found out is, or what I found out, I guess, and this is the problems we see is that everyone's on a different maturity level, right? When
Mhm.
I was working with this customer in Georgia, they're still a customer today, actually, which is great, and they're doing great. But they were trying to answer questions and problems like, just what do we have? Where are my assets at? They were coming from paper, right? How do we actually just optimize our workflows? And so, um, but you think that this is a small town, but then I also then we're working with bigger organizations, like Bear County I mentioned, or
Yep.
we work with City of LA now as one of our large customers. They can still have the same issues, right? The scale is different, but the core problems of what we're trying to solve haven't really changed too much. That was a myth I guess I had going into it of like, hey, if this is a really large city with a large budget and that they're going to just have so much more mature processes and procedures, and that's just not the reality. You're laughing because you get it, and I think you know that over the
Yep.
years,
Yep.
but it's just not the reality. And we work with we've got some amazing customers. A lot of them, I guess, I would actually call out are in the Twin Cities area. One of the ones we work with, Carver County, not too far from where you're at, is
Yeah.
they're a great customer. They're not obviously the largest county that we have, but they've embraced it, right? They've put the time in, they've put the investment in, and they're doing some really, really cool things. And I kind of mentioned like this maturity. We kind of had this concept that we kind of created this maturity model, right? And so like the far left of the maturity model is kind of like, I'm just getting started. I just want to know where my assets are at. I'm just trying to get the 20 or 30 years of data out of the head of the, really tenured staff, right? So that it doesn't just go out the door. Like some of those just really important problems, but just, starting out with the asset management journey. And then the far right side, where of, hey, I'm actually running scenarios, I'm doing predictive analysis, I'm understanding things like risk and level of service, and I'm actually making really good data-driven decisions. And I think find out that everyone's on a different part of that
Yeah.
phase and that journey, right? And it's the best customers I've found and the best customers we've worked with have kind of understood that, but also have invested into always being better. It's kind of that growth mindset that we talk
Mhm.
about a lot, being better tomorrow for today, or tomorrow, being better tomorrow versus yesterday, right? And we've seen that, and they have, whether it's just one person that's focused on that or it's a team working on that, that's where we've seen a lot of success of customers being able to really again take the product. The product is the product, but then in putting the product in the hands of a team that's got great processes and great people can make that asset management journey, move to the right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say even based on my experiences, and I would say pretty similar. You could probably say this about all three organizations that I worked in. Um, you talk about some organizations just have those processes and things like that. And I would say even drilling down a little further, and I would imagine at LA it's even more pronounced. You can have one division within that organization that is really well organized, has those processes developed, maybe is using some technology, has bought into GIS, has been using that in some capacity, and then they become your champion for implementing asset management across the entire organization, or at least across the entire department. And and then those those champions and like Tim Brandon in Maple Grove was our champion there, and he was our sign guy, and our GIS guy Jay Kapelzinski was there, and Tim and Jay really um, pushed the rest of the public works department there to embrace this and use it, and parks as well. And then like we had and I just feel the need to call these people out because they're going to get mad at me if I don't. Like Sally Ricard in at Roseville was our champion, and she was a database specialist. Like she was our software person, and we were so lucky we had somebody like that became that champion. And now in Brooklyn Park, we're looking for that. We're waiting for somebody to like step up. We've got Russ and Mallory here. who are kind of our admin people, and they're just trying to figure it out. We're pushing them right now, and we're waiting for those champions to show up in those divisions to push the rest of us. But it's interesting just to kind of watch that evolution. And I'm a little bit more of an outsider here at Brooklyn Park than I was at Roseville and Maple Grove. But it's really interesting to watch the evolution of the staff and the divisions to embrace it. And we've got Aki is our tree guy or forester, and he's like just all in on it. And Taylor in our facilities group is starting to populate a bunch of data, and they're not even exactly sure how they're going to use it yet, but they're just like, they can see the potential in it. And so it's fun to watch that, and I'm really interested. I'm really anxious and eager to see that evolve and populate and kind of like spread almost like a virus in a positive way to the other team members here. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear you talk about that it's very similar across all those organizations. And what I love about asset management is it's a lot easier when there are some developed processes and workflows and things like that. But what I've seen is it's as long as you've got that champion, you've got that commitment at the leadership level, you can use asset management to develop those work processes. It forces it a little bit. It's a little bit, you run into a little bit more friction, but you can use that to develop the work process. I'm thinking out loud here as we're going on. I'm rambling a little bit perhaps, but the other interesting thing about asset management, and when people think about asset management, they think about the assets. They think about tracking the assets and the history of them and install dates and life cycles and this, that, and the other. But I would say really on your day-to-day level, it's really more about work management. That's where most of your staff is really going to integrate with and interface with the asset management system, is on that work management level, taking in the phone calls or even the automated 311 calls or website form service requests and things like that, and then generating work orders out of them, and then tracking those and tracking the work orders. And so that your public works guy shows up, or gal shows up to work, and they open their phone up and there's 6 work orders for them, and they know what they're doing in the day. And I think that's the really transformative component that people see on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, it's huge from the long-term management of the assets and budgeting and capital planning and things like that as well. But that was kind of the surprising thing for me, I guess, when I started implementing asset management at Maple Grove. I didn't think about the work management side of it as much, but that's such a huge component of it.
Yeah, we always say, I 100% agree with you, Mark. And we always have this, it's an eternal terminology of like building this data pyramid. And if you think about this, like everyone, when you buy these types of softwares and you're trying to, build your processes for asset management, right? You're usually thinking at the beginning, kind of the tip of the pyramid, right? Like I want to be able to, decide when I need to repair or replace these assets, and I want to make these really data-driven decisions. Well, I agree with that, and that's really important. But if you don't have the base of the pyramid solid, which is, your day in, day out field staff putting in great data with the work management, you'll never be able to actually go to the top of the pyramid, right, and actually make those. So this is really like building something that people want to use, right? If people aren't using the product and they go back to a paper workflow, well, what's the impact of that? Well, the data is not going to be in there in real time. There'll be more mistakes. Can we trust the data? So making sure that the work is getting entered in, it's getting entered into the accuracy that you want, is driving ultimately a lot of these processes and data. And, it takes time to build that, right? And
Right.
And this is where I 100%, we've had to tell customers, a lot of times people that haven't been, they maybe don't have as much experience, right? Implementing these types of asset management solutions, they want to just kind of eat the elephant at once, right? Where they're just going to go in and let's just implement every department across the city. Well, we kind of have to tell them to slow down a little bit, because it's better to build successes in certain divisions, right? Like, let's say, hey, we're going to really focus on the park side because they've got a very good process. Let's build some wins. let's build a strong champion, and then that's just going to kind of help parlay that into the other departments that actually want to implement. So yeah, having that kind of phased approach we've always seen has been really successful with our customers too.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing at Brooklyn Park right now. Of the domains, as you call it, that
Yep.
you have, we're implementing 4 of them. Which surprised me when I came in because a lot of those decisions had been made. But I've only been with Brooklyn Park since July of 20 last year, 2025. It's or 2024. Sorry, it's now April of 2026. If you're listening to this in 2030, you understand the timeline. But I hope people are still listening to my podcast in 2030. But uh, when I came in, I was surprised at the domains that they picked. And they picked fleet, they picked parks, they picked water treatment. That was a real surprise for me. And facilities. And I was like, why would they do that? Because we do have, we've got GIS data for streets, we have GIS data for our water lines and sewer lines and things like that. But there was some method to the madness. And part of that was, I think, recognizing where they had some potential champions as staff members within that. And it has been really good for us to implement a smaller set of the total assets in the city and then get that buy-in, and really to make sure that it works before you then bring in the other 100,000 asset points or whatever. And I threw that number out, and it's probably not too far from that.
Yeah.
When you consider all the water and sewer and streets and everything else. But yeah, so I think ultimately it'll be good. It's just a matter of there might be a little bit of burnout from an implementation perspective if we pick up the next domains as soon as we're done with these. But yeah, I think it was smart to do that and do that way. Do you see communities like the size of Brooklyn Park? I guess not looking at an LA, but because LA is pretty siloed, I imagine. You're probably working more specifically with individual divisions within a city like that. But like,
Yep.
A community like the size of Brooklyn Park across the country, do you see them implementing in stages, or are they trying to take it all in one bite, you think?
It's mostly stages, and again,
Okay.
we try to drive people to that, I think, too, just
Yep.
because over the years we've done enough of these where we've seen successes and failures when we try to, do too much. And so, but again, I think everyone's maturity level, like, are they coming from a existing system or are they coming from, paper? And that answer might be different between, like you said, between the parks department versus the utilities department or the transportation group.
Yep.
So I think I don't know if there's a one size fits all, but I do think that you want to just find ways to keep momentum, right? And I think if you're lumping everything together, everything just takes longer versus if you can at least say we got a really we have a big need in our parks department. Let's get them up and running. Great. Okay, facilities, you're next. Okay, now we can move on to, let's say, the transportation group or the sign
Yeah.
management group. Yeah.
Um, I guess I want to move on to the future,
Okay. All right.
I was trying to look through to make sure we didn't miss anything in the present. But let's talk about the future. What is the future of asset management, and where does OpenGov think they're going to take the Cartegraph Asset Management System? What comes to mind, like the first things that come to your mind when you think about the future, John?
Yeah, I mean, a big one that I would say I think is really, really important is this concept of really having connected systems and
Mhm.
complementary business systems. I think we still see a lot, again, not just talking about asset management, like complement, like permitting and licensing, utility billing, finance, 311 systems, like really thinking about more of kind of what we call the full ERP kind of solution. And today,
Yep.
a lot of those processes and solutions are very siloed, right? Like, hey, I don't want to talk with finance; they're over there. The budgeting team is over here, and asset management is here. And if certainly you can build successes within each group, but I do feel like there's so much value and so much synergy that can be driven by having these systems truly talk to each other and work kind of cohesively together. I think that's the beauty of kind of the vision of OpenGov, is to kind of be this cloud provider of these solutions for government, to kind of be the ERP, right? When we were just Cartegraph, we had a really strong asset management system, but we always wanted a permitting system because we saw so many people kept asking us like, hey, what do you guys do for permitting? And there's a lot of workflows, right, that a permit generates tasks for the asset group and the work group. So now we kind of have this vision, and so we're trying to build, like, how do we then make it not feel like it's all separate systems, right? Like, how can we make the experience where you can switch from one to the other? Data is flowing between those. So I think that just what we call kind of this connected government is really, really powerful. One of the stories that we kind of talk about, Mark, is this concept of wrench to wallet. It's kind of a funny terminology, but
wrench to wallet.
Yeah, it's kind of this one of the solutions we have at OpenGov is a budgeting and planning. So it's with the budgeting office, and a lot of the budgeting is never fun, right? And it's hard. Like,
Nope.
how do we get the data and the information? But the information that we're storing in the asset management side obviously is really important when it comes to budget season of, what are we going to invest our time in and money in, right? And so being able to share that data and not just going and saying, this is what we budgeted last year, let's give us 5% more, or
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, actually taking real data and vice versa, sharing that between those systems is, we think, a really powerful story, and really a problem that's not solved very well in the industry today.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, John, because we are actually talking about that here. We've been using a CIP planning tool for a while, and our license is running out on it. And it was interesting because we had conversations. Greg Hoig, who's the current director for operations and maintenance, he's been having these conversations with finance about, well, who owns this? Who owns the CIP software? Who gets to pick it? And finance like, well, this is your guys. Like, we don't. And we're like, well, this is a finance thing. But there are strong connections between the two. And so we are going to be looking at OpenGov's budgeting and CIP tool to see how that integration can help us. But yeah, it's when you can go in and select, over the next 5 years, here are the water mains that we plan on replacing or rehabilitating. Here are the streets that we're going to mill and overlay or reconstruct. And then just import that into your budget system, because it's, you've got the square footage, so you can estimate costs based on that and blah, blah, blah. It's a lot simpler, and it's a heck of a lot more accurate than some of the other, just like you said, we've got $1 million. Okay, so we'll figure out how we're going to spend $1 million. Right. But is that really the right number for? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and it goes back to we're all citizens too, right? And we want to know where our tax dollars are going, and being able to have more data to back up that this is why we're doing this, right? There's always a reason, but actually being able to see the data, I think, is super impactful that we can help with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you brought up the connected systems. I'm kind of also interested in, because no one software company can be everything to everyone. What are some of the partnerships that you leverage or that you have with some other companies for? Because I think some of the biggest improvements, or some of the future, the greatest potential in the future for asset management is data collection and data management. But you're not going to be able to do all of the data collection. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the partnerships that you have now, or that you're working on for that data collection side.
Yeah, that's a great topic, and I agree with you. I think our stance has been, and we've been lucky, I think, over the years of being a company. Cartegraph's been around for 30 years, where we've been able to build a really good partner ecosystem and a lot of relationships with these other vendors, because we definitely believe, like, we're not a CCTV vet. We don't provide cameras for trucks to go in, and and we don't do the pavement distresses and OC PCI collection. So, but that data is really important, and it makes our system hum, right? Like, the better the data that can come in from those systems, the better our customers can use our system to make decisions, right? So having that data is almost the it's really the lifeblood of making the system work really well. So we see CCTV is a big one. We work with a lot of vendors there. IT pipes is one that we work with quite a bit. 311, obviously, I think everyone's got a 311 system at this point, and we've worked with a lot of them. It's a necessary thing, right? To get the citizen. 811 though is actually one that we have put a lot of and seen a lot of success with lately, and the call before you dig, because that we found there's a big problem there, right? It's like those 811 tickets are coming in, and someone at the organization needs to actually send someone out, right, to actually mark it out, and that workflow isn't always, you don't want to have a separate workflow for the same group that might be doing other types of work. So being able to have that feed into the work management system that they're already using, really, really impactful. But I think, to your point about, how can we make asset management better as well? It's, flow direction sensor, like I'm kind of still, I would say, waiting for like the tsunami to kind of finally come over, the wave to crash over a little bit. We've been talking about like Internet of Things for a lot of years, and these sensors, and they've gotten cheaper, but they still haven't like fully hit kind of mass use, I guess, across the industry. But I mean, you see a lot with treatment plants. Like SCADA systems have been around for a long time, right? To track, what's the runtime hours and the pump hours, and drive preventative maintenance based on that, alarms. But I do think that's, from the future standpoint, that's an area where I think there's still a lot of room for growth, because I think those are just tools that are going to make just things so much quicker and easier and more efficient just by having that data without having to go out to the field. Go ahead.
That's one of my future podcast episodes, and I got to find the right person to talk to. So if you've got a reference, let me know. And I was just talking to my utilities manager, Rick Luco, about this yesterday, because we were talking about a new water tower that we're building in Brooklyn Park here, and I was like, okay, so what can we do technology wise? How can we push ourselves? Because I'm all about Internet of Things. I want to implement Internet of Things, but I also don't want to do it just to do it. And when we're talking about public dollars, you can't just do something to do it. You got to have a reason and a purpose, and you've got to get some benefit out of it to justify the cost. But yeah, I see a future where, the problem with SCADA is it is a closed loop system by definition, or by need. It needs to be isolated and secure. And so you're not going to just, pop it up on your desktop computer in your Cartegraph dashboard, because it's a separate system, and it has to be because of the control side of it. So how do we, and as Rick mentioned yesterday, it's a SATA system. It's without the C, without the control. Can we justify creating a separate system of sensors, and just sensors without the control, that just lets us know what's going on that system? And it's kind of a backup to SCADA, but then it's also providing a bunch of data for our asset management system, data that we don't even know what we might do with it yet. As we talk about artificial intelligence, we're going to move into that here in a minute. As we talk about AI, and if we've got 5 years of data of like flow and pressure data in our water distribution system, and we can correlate water main breaks to that pressure and flow data, can an AI system go in and find the common factors so that we can predict, or we can notify our maintenance staff when a break is like literally happening in the moment versus waiting for somebody to call it in? I mean, those are the kind of things that I think ahead in, is that predictive and instant notification type of system that we can do with something that can analyze large amounts of data that a human can't.
That's the kind of stuff that gives you goosebumps, right? Like that's like those types of scenarios. You're like, oh man, like that's
the nerds anyway. But
that's what I want to get to, right? Yeah, it's you think about just the the quality of life and like the dollars you could save by having that predictive analysis. Like that's where the secret sauce, I think, is going to be. Being able to get that information, but then feeding it into a system that actually allows you to take action, right? Like, what are we going to do with, like, to your point, like, it's great that we've got like, years of data, but what is that data telling us? Is it just noise? Where's the signal in the noise, right? And then what are we going to do with that, I think, is the always that piece that still needs work, right? That we need to get to.
So what conversations have you guys had maybe internally, thinking, out in the future about data management? Even like how long do you keep some of this data? Where are you storing it? How are you getting it? Things like that. What conversations have you had about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think as our customers, we've had the benefit of having customers for sometimes 15, 20 years, and over that time they build up a lot of data, right?
Yeah.
And that's good, right? Customers grow, and we've had to kind of think about it from a technology standpoint of how do we make sure the system can scale and optimize, right? Do we have the scalability that, hey, we're supporting not only your data today when you first implement, right? You might be pulling it from a different system, but also what does your data look like 5 years, 10 years from now? Certainly, yeah, we've had some conversations with customers about data retention, like how long do I actually need to keep this data? And that it seems like that's not always consistent. It depends on different, I think, cities and rules and regulations on that. But we have had conversations recently about thinking about archiving the data, right? It's
Yeah.
like, do you really need to look at all 1 million tasks for things that were done 30 years ago? Probably not. You're probably
No.
looking at maybe once every year or two, maybe if you wanted to run a report, but most of the time you're looking at data that's probably within the last year or 2 years, right? That's the type of data that's probably actually important to make decisions. So not, I would say we don't like the concept of deleting data, but if we have a concept of either archiving or putting in kind of into a separate area to maintain kind of the speed and the focus of the system, but still giving access to that data, where it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. That it is. And what happens when you archive the data, and how easy is it to get to it, and some things like that. But I think that's really going to be one of the largest challenges we have, is that data management piece. I mean, we also have data practices, laws that we have to worry about, and this, that, and the other. But um, there is definitely, I think it's going to take us a while, and some of us already kind of see it, the value in historic data, depending on what that data is, how granular it is, things like that, that we may be able to extract things out of that data in the future that we can't do yet. We don't know what we want to know about that data yet, but it might still be useful to us, as historical data, looking back. So I don't know. Again,
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. It's hard because it's a lot easier. Like, back in the paper days, right? Like it was very visible. We got all these filing cabinets with all these papers and things but now it's all in the cloud, right? It's all stored. And so it's easy just to store it, but also, how easy is it going to get back to it, and what are we going to use it for? Yeah, there's kind of this hoarder mentality, and I have got that too, of like, why would I ever delete anything, right? I've got unlimited storage space in the cloud. Like, why would I ever delete something? And as long as you're, I guess, managing it in a way that actually you could find it back again. And AI, I think, is, we talked about AI as a tool where that's answering those questions you mentioned, like what can we do with the data? AI is going to feed on, AI. That's what drives the success of AI, is ultimately data, right? The better the data and information we have can drive that forward. So, and we don't know the questions yet. Maybe we don't know what we're trying to solve yet.
We don't.
Yeah. It could probably is, if we try to predict that here today, will probably not be right. But but yeah, if we're not collecting if we have the data though, I guess we have the flexibility, long term to be able to answer those questions if we need to.
Right. Yeah, and again, we're jumping around a little bit again here, but anything else you want to say about AI, and kind of the future of asset management there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, we could talk a lot about AI. I think at OpenGov, we're really kind of all in, right? We do think it's this kind of this tsunami, right, or this wave coming through. It's either you're going to ride the wave, or you're going to kind of have it crash over you. I think it's truly a piece of it. And I think we've had the luxury of At least I've had the luxury like building. We've actually have an AI feature in our product today that's been out there for several years. Kind of before AI, I guess, was maybe as it was buzzwordy and kind of
Right.
as high of focus. And I don't know if you've
Before
used it.
AI went viral. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if you've used it, but it's kind of a cool little feature that if you take a picture of an asset just using your phone, it automatically recognizes what the asset is. It grabs the
Oh,
location and it actually identifies the asset. So like a good example of that is like for a sign is
yep.
that you can take a picture of, let's say, a stop sign. Just by taking the picture, it recognizes obviously it's a sign. It grabs the GPS location. It also knows what the MUTCD code is, as well as any text on that sign, and it just does it all for you, right? And so that feature's been out there for 3 or 4 years. The cool thing is that because the technology in the AI has gotten better, the accuracy has gotten better with that. The amount of assets that we can collect and the confidence we have with that has gotten better. So that's just one of those features that we were pretty early on. It worked okay, and now the last year or so, it's like okay, this thing is actually really really good. It's like it's learning, right, and it's getting better. Um, I think, and we've got a lot of things on our roadmap. Like I think this is exciting, right? We've got just one of the areas that we're really looking at is around a lot of problems around scheduling work and balancing work. That's like a problem we've been dealing with. Like you talked about work management being
Yeah.
a big need, and the process of making sure that we actually balance the work. Like how do we know that Mark needs this many tasks and how much hours he's going to work? How can we balance that? And today it's a lot of manual processes. People are using spreadsheets or whiteboards or whatever the case might be. And how can we use AI to filter that data in, understand, skill sets, workloads, even things like weather. Like, hey, if we're going to do mowing tomorrow and it's got a higher percentage chance of rain, why don't we move that to the next day, right? Like actually taking in that information, what equipment is available. So that's some really, really cool things I think we're looking at investigating. And then I think, from an AI standpoint, just how we interact with our systems is going to change, right? So instead of, how we're using smartphones, obviously it's kind of manual, we're using, keyboard and mouse, but just the advent of all these agents and assistants, right? You know, when someone goes and is wants to, let's say, get some data for a dashboard, they don't really want to build a dashboard. They just want to get their answer, So if we can actually create assistants where they can ask their question more in a natural language way, the output might be a dashboard gadget or a layer or a filter, but thinking of it in a different way, right? It's like, hey, I might just be able to ask my question more in a natural language, and then the system can output actually how I want to visualize it and get that data. Because instead of like today, I have to know how to build a gadget. I got to build a
Yeah.
report.
Yeah. I
Why?
was going to say, we would sign up for that tomorrow because that's one of the largest issues we're facing, even after going through the training that we went through a few weeks ago. Mark Groom dropped that name. He did a great job. Um, yeah, a lot of questions like, well, I don't know what I want on my dashboard. What do I want? What's even available? And I love the concept of just being able to say, okay, well, I want to know how many work orders are open. And the system just popping up the gadget rather than you having to go dig for it and then populate it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, go, John, go.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, like, I think these have been things we've thought about these things for a while, and the technology just wasn't quite mature enough, I think, to actually make it happen. But that's rapidly changed, which that's the exciting part is I think now and it's changing every day, right? It's a, it is the rapid pace of acceleration on the AI side is pretty crazy, but um, yeah, those are a few things, and yeah, we those are the fun projects, right? Because it's just things that you would never have thought about before that
Yeah.
could make some really, really big impacts. That again, I don't think our customers are even thinking about a lot of times too, right? We're kind of having to take the next, not just what they're asking for, but what's the things that they're going to ask for 2 years from now, or one or two, like what's the things that they're going to need in the future, and part of the job of the product manager, right, is how can we think a few steps ahead, right? And
Yep.
make sure that we can lead to that, not just kind of be reactive to those types of
But
things.
also, how do you prioritize? I mean, you have 100 ideas in your head, or you've got 100 ideas from your customers. How do you how do you prioritize those two? So
It's not easy. Yeah, we want to do
no,
it all. We want to
yep,
do it all, and
yep.
we can't. Yeah, there's always time, materials. There's always some restraints there, but that's part of the job for sure.
Well, awesome. Hey, this has been great, John. I love this conversation. I don't know what it is about asset management that I love talking about so much, but I do. And so this has been great. And I really look forward to, and I hope that maybe I can ask you back on maybe in 6 months or so, and maybe we can highlight a couple of newer features that you guys have got in the software, or talk a little bit more about where you're using AI. Because I love that, um, highlighting, what you've already been doing for a few years with the recognition of the signs and other assets through the pictures. But would love to talk about some more things as you get more comfortable about talking about it. So
Yeah, I'd love to do that, and yeah, I
yeah,
think yeah, because as things have changed so much, I think in 6 months, or so, we'll have a lot to talk about. I think there'll be
yeah,
a lot of really really cool changes. So yeah.
good. You actually, there was one other thing that you mentioned in your script, and maybe we'll just kind of close on it. And that was a recent acquisition of your guys's. What was the name of the
Yes.
company?
Yeah, so the company was called Ignatius.
Yes.
We've now rebranded that in the OpenGov kind of platform to what we're calling the Government App Builder. And this is a really, really powerful tool. So it allows basically, ourselves, but also our customers to really create these experiences very quickly. So things like we have a grants management application that we're going to be rolling out that, hey, being able to take a form or take a kind of more of a paper process and actually automate that. And AI is built, it's actually really, really cool. I'm learning a lot myself on this tool. It's pretty new, but being able to then, like I said, instead of having to manually create a form and create the fields, just use AI to describe what is your workflow, how does this need to work, and have it build it for you. And so
Wow.
the benefit is we can get value a lot quicker, get these solutions, and it's kind of these kind of underserved areas, right? That don't really have, like, people are just kind of putting together their own processes for some of these kind of very specific use cases. And yeah, so it's very, very early stages, I would say, but it's when we talk about kind of where AI is impacting things, I'm really excited about the some of the things that we're going to be able to use it for.
Well, cool. Well, I maybe in 6 months we'll talk more about how you guys are rolling that out, and what cool things you're
Yeah,
doing
I
with it.
bring
So,
Mark on my team. Yeah, maybe you can bring him along too, and he's working with that product as well. So yeah, for sure.
Mr. Groom.
No, this is a different, yeah, different Mark, I
Oh, okay.
guess.
Oh,
Yeah,
different
yeah,
market. Got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hey, I just want to close. First of all, thank you, John. I also want to, call out Jane Shepard and Anna. I mentioned Mark Groom, um, Ryan, who helped us buy this system to begin with, and Christina Espinoza, who's now carrying the torch for Ryan as we look to expand it. But all great members of this OpenGov team that have helped Brooklyn Park move into the future, well, or even the present, with asset management. So just wanted to do a shout out to them for a great team. So, well, hey, thank you, John. Appreciate your time, and love the conversation, and look forward to future conversations in the not too distant future.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and one last thing before we go, this is our third season, and I say it after every episode. We would love to see our audience grow. So if you're listening to this, if you're listening to it for the first time, we would love if you would go on our LinkedIn page. Just look for the Public Works Nerds on LinkedIn. Repost it or put a comment on the episode, and just help spread the word. Get your colleagues listening to it. If you've got an episode idea, use that same format. It's the best way to get a hold of us on LinkedIn. But let me know what your episode idea is with the topic, or even the person. Or if you've got a passion for something you want to talk about it, let me know and we'll talk about it. But thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time. Nerds out.